And welcome back, guys. Today was round number 7 of the European Team Chess Championship. Austria played against our neighbors Italy, and I was on board 4 against Francesco Sonis, who is also my age. We've played many games together, and we had a very level score before that. And many of our games did end in draws before, but let's see what happened today. So I had the black pieces, and he opened with c4. I went for e6, knight c3, d5, d4, and knight f6, inviting him to go for the Karlsbad. That was my preparation for today, since it was a little bit easier to prepare for all of the different move orders, because he could start with one c4 and he could also start with one d4, and I did not want to learn or repeat both of the Nimzo and something against c4 like e5 or c5. Therefore I decided that it could be smart to just go for the Karlsbad. He played bishop g5. Now I went for the move c6. Also possible is bishop e7, which I've also played in the past, with the idea that this pawn could sometimes even go to c5 if white commits to some other things. But I went for the classical move c6. He went queen c2. The whole point is that of the move queen c2 is that white does not allow the option of bishop f5, which at least I've played in the past, I think twice already, so therefore maybe he wanted to avoid that by going queen c2. I went h6, bishop h4, and now g6, which is kind of the point why, or one of the downsides for white of starting with queen c2, since I cannot, I mean, that doesn't make any sense if I would do that here, because I don't get bishop f5 with the tempo. And in this exact line, I get to exchange my light squared bishop against white's light squared bishop, which is typically what black is quite happy about, since the bishop is not really doing so much on c8. The funny thing is that I actually repeated the line before the game, but I really wanted to make sure that I'm not running into any of those tricks. And as it often is with the computer, since it is not working, it's not showing the moves, and I forgot to analyze this. So I had to figure this out. That's why I spent a little bit of time. This doesn't work, knight takes d5, because of queen takes d4. Knight c7, and now I thought king d8 when bishop b4 is a threat. I guess this is common knowledge, but I wasn't, I wasn't so sure like during the game. I've never checked this like with the computer or on ChessBase. Another thing which I actually wasn't sure, I'm still not sure what happens after knight takes d5, with the point that if c takes d5, now bishop takes f6, and if queen takes f6, now queen takes c8. I thought that there should be something after queen takes d5, bishop f6, bishop b4 check. He has to go king d1, and I just thought that this should be quite dangerous for white with bishop f5 to come. But yeah, still I wanted to spend some time to just make sure nothing of that works. By the way, it's important, as far as I remember, to start with h6, because if I would start with g6, now after e3, bishop f5, white has the annoying move queen b3. And if both of those moves are included already, then I have the move g5. Therefore, he cannot go for that here. So he has to go for this position. Now bishop g7, knight e2. In general, here, of course, exchanging the light squared bishop is in black's favor, but I've also sort of weakened myself on the king side a little bit, and it's not entirely clear if my bishop is actually so great fianchettoed in the Karlsbad structure. Often it's better on e7 or d6, but on the other hand, I managed to exchange this often passive bishop on c8. By the way, it might be a bit more precise to start with knight d7 here. At least I thought so after I played bishop d7, because maybe now f4 is not really an option, because I have some g5 ideas, or just bishop e7, which maybe he could have tried that here with f4 followed by knight f3, knight e5. So in the future I would probably start with the move knight bd7 here, so that after f4 I would have the move bishop e7. But he anyway went for this. He was blitzing out all of this for quite a long time. I was also still in the book here after f3, rook e8. But after rook a1, I only remembered some plans for black here overall. I was not... I didn't really know much theory, I just thought that the position would be playable. The only line which I knew was the concrete move e4, and I think this has never been really played, but as far as I remember, black had to be really precise here. I think I need to take on e4. Now I'll go g5, bishop g3, knight c5, queen c4, knight takes e4. No, how was that? Was it like this? Remember some very forcing line. Let me think. Is it knight c5 immediately? I mean, this looks alright. Knight c5, queen c4. Why can't I just take here? Because I remembered that knight takes e4 should be the move. I mean, maybe bishop e5 here is possible with knight g3 to come. Because the thing I remembered was something like this. Queen f7, king h8, bishop e5, rook e5, d takes e5, queen b6, king h1, rook f8. How was it? Queen b3? And this was the repetition I I vaguely remembered when I was going to this line. Also keep in mind that queen g1 doesn't work here because after knight takes g1 I don't have this moderate mate on f2. So that was the only line which I vaguely remembered if white goes for the immediate e4. Because, I mean, e4 you always need to be careful about, because if I don't have anything concrete, then white is just strategically winning if he gets e5, sometimes even winning material on the spot. But he went rook 81, now I played queen e7, he played bishop f2. E4 now should not work because now I can take and go g5, and now in all of those lines also f7 would be protected. So here I don't even need the move knight c5, which worked earlier. By the way, I maybe should mention that here knight c5 only works because of because the queen on d3 is hanging, so therefore white cannot take on c5. After knight f8, well, I was saying here the move e4 doesn't work because I can just capture on e4 and I just won a pawn for nothing. So he went bishop f2, guarding the pawn on e3. Now I went bishop f8. I quickly went through the game with the live engine. Also knight b6 was an option, which I also briefly considered, with the idea to maybe go to d6 and then fully control the e4 square. But I mostly remembered some lines where I put the knight to e6. That was most of my preparation, where also from e6 it can attack the pawn on d4 if white would go for the move d4 later on, e4 later on. And also from e6, after white goes e4, the f4 square can become a little bit vulnerable. Like in some lines, I don't know how exactly I could get it, but for example, if he goes knight g3, I go knight e6. Now, after e4, he always needs to worry about some ideas with knight f4. So this knight on e6 is typically quite nice in this type of structure. Whoops, that was my mistake. Where were we? Exactly here, after knight f8. Here he surprised me a little bit by playing the move queen b1, which is a very decent move objectively speaking. I just didn't really think about it because I just didn't really expect it, because I was not really thinking that he would actually go for the minority attack in this position. Because if he has the pawn on f3 already, then it's quite clear that his plan should be to push for e4. But it did make sense after all in the game, at least from how I played. I was mostly expecting some moves like king h1, for example, then slowly preparing something like knight g3 and maybe h3 and e4. And I need to be careful to always have some prophylactic resources against him going e4. Also here, I mean, he cannot go e4 because I can just take the pawn, but another important idea is generally to have knight g4 in those positions, so therefore white very often goes for h3, trying to prepare e4 later on. Anyway, he went queen b1, I went rook 88, which is a decent move. I just wanted to, if he at some point goes e4, have the rook on the d file. It just felt pretty natural. And I also had the plan of maybe going b6, c5, which then I actually did on the next move. Because he played the move knight c1, which again I thought does look a little bit strange in this exact position, even though it's a very typical plan in the chaos but in general, to put the knight to b3 from where it protects the d4 pawn, and it's also not really in the way anymore, because on e2 it's a little bit awkward, and then later on, if white gets all of this, knight b3, rook e1, he can, after h3, really try to get an e4. So therefore I decided to play the move b6 here, which is quite weakening the pawn on c6, but here it doesn't really matter because this is typically only an issue if white has the knight on f3 from where it can jump to e5 immediately, harassing the pawn on c6. He went b4 now. Yeah, I was also thinking actually what he will do after knight e6. This was another idea which I had, because if he goes knight b3 now, then I would actually maybe go b6, and now he cannot stop me from going c5 by going b4 himself. But I thought that maybe he would go actually to d3 with the knight. I was not sure at all here. And if I go b6 now, then again he can go for b4, which should also be playable for sure for black. Let me quickly see. Yeah, knight e6 is also very much possible. The computer gives 0.00 in this position. What a surprise. But I went for b6, b4, and now c5. Again, if knight e6, I thought that he would go probably knight d3. And I wasn't so sure what I'm actually playing for here, because now c5 probably doesn't work anymore so well. Because I thought that maybe he has some knight f4 ideas to immediately put pressure here. Or maybe some tactical things also work, even though that was also possible in the game. And I didn't think that that would generally work, those type of things, because I'm just way too active. And for example here, after e4, I would probably have to move knight e3, which should be winning for me. But I think I was mostly worried about the move knight f4 in this exact position, and I wasn't sure how I would protect the pawn on d5. Yeah, maybe I can also play this position slowly, some move like h5 or so, but then I was really a bit worried that at some point he would go after my c6 pawn. So I tried it the concrete way. I played c5, he took, I took back, he took once again. Otherwise, I would consider maybe even going for c4 or c takes d4, it depends what he will do. But for example, if knight b3, now I would probably not take, because now he would get a favorable version, but instead I would probably go for c4. And now I'm pretty fast with counterplay on the queen side, like rook b8, maybe queen b4, knight e6, and he's probably not gonna get e4 in the near future. So we went for this, queen takes e5, rook d3. Now I went, yeah, rook d3 looks a bit awkward at first, but I thought this is the best move, since it's protecting the knight here, and also it's facilitating rook f to d1 on the next move, putting pressure on d5. I went knight e6, rook f d1. I should mention here that e4 might look a little bit scary for black, but I just thought that this would be way too early for him. I didn't even consider like a concrete move. I mean, I did both queen c6 and queen c4. Even d4 looked quite dangerous for him, but I just had a feeling here that this shouldn't work for him. Like, for example, if d4, knight b3, I have queen g5, and if he takes here like knight f4, it just feels like this cannot be great for white. So he went rook d1, now queen c4. Since with the rook on d1, now I do have to be a bit careful about e4 happening, and the queen is anyway not always so great on c5, because it could also run into knight b3. Here he went queen b3 in this position, which surprised me a little bit, but I also have to say that up until this point, and also a few moves later, I really played very well. I just have to give myself credit for that. I guess my moves were not so complicated after all, but I managed to equalize pretty easily out of the opening, and now even got a slight advantage, which, yeah, we will get to that soon. I'm curious though that in this position I was mostly expecting knight b3, and I actually wasn't sure what I would go for here, because now, well, it's not so clear what he would actually do on the next move, but it's also not clear what I'm doing. Like, I felt like my position is kind of improved to the maximum, and you won't believe it, but the move I would have made was move a6. I just felt like the pawn on a7 could be hanging at some moment, and yeah, if I go to a6, then I'm asking him what he will do on the next move. If you would go h3, then I would maybe go h5, because I honestly didn't see a plan at all for me, because if I move this rook, then the pawn on d5 would be hanging. I cannot really move this rook anywhere, because if I go to e7, then the d8 rook would be hanging. Like, also when I move this knight, then d5 would be hanging, and the only other active move would be knight c5. But here I didn't like the fact that now maybe e4 actually works in this position. And then I'm probably losing the d5 pawn. I'm curious what the computer says here. Actually d4 is working. I didn't see that. I didn't see that at all. But I mean, I saw the idea at some moment. Let me see if a6 is possible. Yeah, but here white is a bit better after, for example, queen c1. But I completely missed d4, I have to say that. I guess the point is if knight takes d4, now I have knight c5. And now he's probably going to lose the exchange, because he cannot move the rook, since then the knight on c3 would be hanging. And if e takes d4, I guess the same story. I can go knight f4, and there's no comfortable way for him to keep the knight on c3 defended. That's a nice motive. I have to be honest, I did not see that in the game. That also explains why he went queen b3 after some thought. Now I went rook b8, trying to get a favorable version of the endgame, because now he has to take. he actually spent a lot of time here. I don't know if he missed rook b8 or if he was banking on some other queen moves, but all of this shouldn't work. Like if queen a3, I thought he's just probably losing the queen at some moment, or at least it looked quite scary for him after bishop f8. Yeah, for example, taking here would probably be less of a good idea, because now I still have the weakness on d5 and he gets his knight out with the tempo, so I went rook b8 instead. He took, went rook 3-3-2, and now a nice idea, which is knight g4. I already saw that when I played the move rook b8, because otherwise I felt like if white can consolidate, I should probably also be somewhat okay, but I was always a bit worried about the weakness on c4, which he could try to make use of at some point. So I played knight g4, he went rook c2. I was actually expecting him to take here, and after bishop takes c3, rook c2. When, again, I had a feeling that there should be something here, that I should have enough compensation for sure, but I wasn't entirely sure how I would continue from here on. There were a couple of attractive options. Like I could just move the bishop somewhere, I wasn't sure. Like, for example, if I go here, rook takes c4, rook d8, and take now, king f1. Now maybe, yeah, now for example, rook d2. I think something like this I was thinking about. It just felt like I'm quite active here overall. Maybe there was even something better, like in this position I was also thinking about this move, and then rook d8, so that in this position rook d1 will come and the knight would be hanging, but here I did not like, or I didn't see anything after knight d3 how to continue. There was also the immediate rook d8, which I also felt like should be not too bad for black. This line, for example, rook d1, rook c4, and now something like rook d2. It just felt like I should be quite active here, and white's pawn structure is also a bit weak, so this should be okay for me. Computer gives 0.5 for white here, so I guess this was not the best, but still had a feeling that this should be, practically speaking, a pretty straightforward draw for black, because I'm just so active. Let me actually see. I'm curious what is the most precise way here. Bishop a5 is good, or bishop f6. Well, I have a couple of different options, but bishop a5, rook c4. I also saw that idea to place the bishop to b6 later on. So he likes rook b2 and then to just play bishop b6, and then ideas like knight g5, knight d4. That's the most precise way of continuing. But anyway, he went rook c2, which surprised me a little bit. Now I took on f2, and here I took on c3, thinking that getting the rook to b2 is more important than preserving my nice bishop on g7. I didn't really see another way another attractive way to play. I mean, I thought that I could go for something like rook c8 or knight c5, but after that I thought he would like consolidate with knight d2. I guess I can try to put the knight to d3, but I was trying to play more concretely by taking on c3. Yeah, it's also not such a huge difference. Computer says knight c5 is a little bit better, and actually white is under some pressure here in this position, because he has a hard time developing his pieces, because if knight d2, then knight d3 again would come. But I took and went rook b2, king g1, rook c8. Now rook d5, I thought that this was a precise move, because otherwise I would have ideas with rook c5 and rook g5. Talking about that, actually king f1 I thought would be a mistake because of knight g7, which felt like could be a bit unpleasant for him, because knight f5 is coming. And yeah, it's not so easy for him to take care of that, even though now I'm thinking maybe e4 works. Yeah, not entirely sure. I saw this idea in general, but then I wasn't also sure if I would actually go for it, because king f1 then would make more sense if he just has the king here. Maybe that would have been better than king g1, but maybe he was also afraid of knight g7, even though after e4, now that I remember, I didn't really see how it would continue for me here. But he went king g1, now rook c8, again rook d5 to stop rook c5. Now I went rook c6 with the idea to play knight c7, knight b5. I was quite proud about this move, but he has enough defensive resources most likely to handle this threat. He went king f1 now, so that's why I said earlier he should probably go king f1 instead of king g1. I went king g7, this was decent. I was also thinking about knight c7 here. I should have made this move king g7 much faster. This was my major problem in this game, just time management. Because after knight c7, I wanted to play this at first, but then I saw that there's rook d8 and rook c8, and he's pinning me, and I didn't really see a great way to continue from here on. So king g7 and rook d1, and from here on I really started to drift. I played the move rook c5, which already doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I thought that maybe I can play rook g5, which, yeah, I mean, from that regard it does make some sense, but I just missed the move rook e1, and now if I go rook g5, he can just go rook e2, and everything is protected. So instead here I should go for something slow, like for example h5. So also thinking about this, just keeping the status quo. And now in the game I went some ridiculous moves with my rook on c6, and if I just stay here, I'll be fine. Yeah, more than fine actually. He has to be a bit precise here to hold this. I was thinking rook e1, and the point here generally also after h5, if I go knight c7 in this position, then he has the trick knight d3. And I didn't see what I can do now, because if rook takes a2, he has knight b4, forking both of my rooks. So that's also maybe why I should go for the move a5. I briefly saw that the computer has shown this as the best move for me, and now actually he is under quite some pressure, because now I guess knight c7 is quite a big threat. Like if he goes rook e1 here, maybe I can go knight c7, and now this doesn't work because knight b4 is not possible anymore. So a5 is quite a nice prophylactic move here. Yeah, I'm actually not sure what he can do here. I mean, here the position is quite unpleasant for him. It's minus 0.6 according to the computer, and the best is rook e1, knight c7, and knight d3. Rook takes a2, knight e5, and he has to be quite careful here to hold this. I mean, just as an example, this is not the best line, but let's say knight b5, rook c4, and some endgame like this even looks quite scary for white. I mean, not going to be such an easy defensive task. So after a5, I would certainly keep some winning chances here, but instead it completely went wrong for me. I was low on time and I was just panicking here. Rook c5, rook e1, now rook b4, stepping out of rook e2 already, which is still fine. Rook c2, now h5, knight e2, and now I really started panicking. I went rook b8, rook c1, and now rook b4 back. I thought I would place the rook behind the pawn with rook c8, but then I realized that this is also just ridiculous, so I just went back with the rook. So instead here I have a couple of ways to continue. I guess I could make a move like h4, just getting a much better version compared to the game. Also something more active like rook a4 was actually my original idea, would also make much more sense to go for something like this. Instead I just lost two tempos like this, rook b8 and rook b4, so completely ridiculous. Knight c3, now g5, and after actually here some of those moves I played with 1 second, so my time management today was beyond embarrassing. I really need to work on that for the final 2 games, otherwise I might not get away like I did in this game. Even though I have to say my position was so good that even with such a moronic way of playing in time trouble, I even managed to survive this position. So he went knight e4, now rook a5, knight d2, and now I'm just losing the pawn. Just brilliant, going rook b8 and rook b4 back. Maybe I should go for rook c6 here, trying to keep the rook here. And if knight d2 now, then maybe c3. Maybe I have a better version here. In the game he went knight b1. And now I already have the rook on the c file, which probably is a bit better compared to the game, because I had the rook on the a file. But it's not so clear. So rook a5, knight d2, c3. He went knight b1, which is a good move. He could also go knight e4, I guess, in this position. It probably doesn't really make a big difference. He just shouldn't take here, because then I can take on a2. So knight b1, I played h4. This move I made with 1 second. Yeah, if I would have lost on time here, this was the 40th move, I would really lose my mind, and my team captain for sure. So I played h4 just in time with 1 second on the clock, and here at first I was, of course, pretty upset because I had the better side of a draw, if you could say it. He was under some pressure, and now I have to defend with the pawn down. Luckily for me, my position was so nice that even after losing this pawn, it was in the realms of holding a draw, and I also realized that. And try to give my best not to throw the nerves and to just play the game like it just started basically from here. I got the position. I have to be a little bit careful, but with precise play, I thought I should be able to hold this. So I played rook c4, knight e4. Here he played very quickly, just trying to do some tricks. And I also tried to play fairly quickly now because I realized that if I get into time trouble once again, I might not be so lucky anymore. So he played knight e4. I thought that it would be in my interest to keep the rooks on the board for now, because then I have pressure on a2 and it's a bit harder for him to coordinate. He went back, rook c4, now knight b1. Again, I went back to a4. Now a3, rook e5. He went king f2, rook a6. Here, nothing that spectacular. Knight e2. Now I have to be careful not to take because knight c4 wins the exchange. But instead, I went rook d5, knight c4. Now rook c5, king e2, rook c6. He went a4. I actually thought that he might think about bringing the king, but it's also a little bit risky, and since the match was looking quite good for them at this point, he probably didn't want to go for any sketchy stuff like this. I also thought that here, I mean, there could be some things, like it does look a little bit strange for white to have all of the pieces on the c-file. He played a4, now rook a6 and knight b2. I was actually quite happy to see a4 because now once the pawn advances, it's going to be even more difficult for him to defend it. Rook a6, knight b2, now rook e5. Maybe I should have taken a chance to immediately take on c2. That might have also been possible. But I went here, now rook d2. Computer gave a little bit of advantage at a quick moment here. Still not the end of the world. Rook c3 might be objectively a bit better. But he went rook d2, now rook b6. That was a nice move, trying to get out of this bit strange situation with the rook. You might ask, why not knight c4, forking both of my rooks, but here I have rook c5, pinning the knight and the rook. And if he takes here, then, whoops, not rook c2, but rook takes c1. And here I thought it's already sort of a forced draw, because I have, at least this move, maybe also rook c4, and he's just going to be way too passive to create any serious chances. Like here, he would probably need to go rook e2 to hold on to the pawn, and I should have quite a few ways to make a draw here. That would be my feeling. He went rook c3, now knight f4 and just knight e6 back. I didn't really see what else I could do. I could again try to exchange the rooks now, since I have created I mean, since the pawn is now on a4 already, it's going to be harder for him to defend it in this type of endgame because it's already here. But I went check, king f2, knight e6 back, and now he played e4, which really made me quite happy, because now I will always have some counterplay with knight f4 at the right moment too, and therefore now I actually decided to go for the exchange of rooks. He played knight d1. If he takes, then I have threats like rook b4. Also, he needs to be a bit careful about, well, rook takes b2 is now a threat, so this would not be in white's interest, and black is winning. And also this was, for example, one trick, knight b3, and well, probably white is not lost yet, but I do have at least some checks like this. Maybe I even have some chances here, like this endgame. I don't know. But anyway, he did not fall for that. Yeah. And if king e3, there was also rook b3 in this position. So he went knight d1, I went rook b3, and now he went knight b5, a6, knight d4, exchange the knights. If he tries to keep the knights on the board, like rook c2, again, I'm just going to be way too active here. For example, knight d4, rook c1, rook b2, and I'm getting active on the second rank. I mean, white needs to be careful not to over push this position. Something like this could definitely go wrong, but he did not do that. He went knight b5, a6, knight d4. I went into the rook endgame, which I thought is a very simple draw, which is also the case because white's king is just way too passive here. f6, rook b4. Now I played a5 here. I was thinking that maybe he would try this, and after king g6, rook d6, and I had to make sure that after rook takes a4, now f6. Again, probably there are a couple of ways to draw, but I thought king f5 is the cleanest. Now if he takes here, I can take on e5, and if he takes with a pawn, king g6 back, and this should be a simple draw, because this pawn is quite weak, it's probably going to get lost, and yeah, even if I don't have the a6 pawn, then probably it should also be quite a simple draw. But I was just making sure that e6 doesn't work, because like this, well, probably this is also a draw. But I wasn't, yeah, maybe rook f5, and yeah, this could very well be lost actually. No, not so sure about this. So therefore here I needed to make sure, because I also saw rook a5 first, but after e7, rook e5, rook d5 is there, and I'm losing because he can queen. Rook d5 and e8 queen. So I thought that the only move here, well, maybe not only move, but rook a1 was the cleanest, I thought. And if he goes king e2 now, or king f2, I will give another check, king e3, and now I will go here. Because if e7, now I have rook e5 with a check. And if he tries to run in the corner, like king f2, rook a2, king g1, then I have just simple rook e2, and it's a draw on the spot. So therefore I was spending a little bit of time, like not much but 2 minutes on this move, just to make sure that this variation is working out for me. Rook b4, now a5, rook c4, king g6, and here we went for the repetition of moves and settled for draw. So as a summary, I am a little bit disappointed, at least for having to suffer. I mean, I was in such a nice position. I played the opening and middle game stage really well, I think. Outplayed him at some moment, and then I didn't use my chance, which was here, where I should go for the move a5, preparing knight c7 and knight b5. Again, if you missed it earlier, the whole point is that knight c7 immediately runs into this. Knight takes, rook takes a2 and knight b4. So therefore I need to play a5 here, so that now I'm actually threatening the move knight c7, which, to be fair, is not such a simple move, but still, I even thought of the idea quickly in the game, but I, for some reason, didn't go for it. I think I was already running a bit nervous here because of my time disadvantage. So this was the biggest problem in the game. Not having a great time management, and therefore I even ran into a little bit of trouble, but at least I managed to pull myself together after the time control and hold the game more or less smoothly after that. When it comes to the match, unfortunately, we lost quite clearly 3-1. Me and Alexienko on the first board were the only ones to draw. Dominic Horvath lost quite quickly against Sabino Brunello. By the way, I just quickly want to go there, because the funny thing is that Brunello actually played exactly the line which I gave in my 1d4 repertoire for the white side, which you can find on my YouTube channel. I released it like 1 year ago. It's from another move order. He played it with knight f3, knight f6, and now b3. I gave it in my repertoire like this. This was what I suggested for my mini repertoire from the white side, 1d4. Now b3, bishop g7, and they also reached exactly the same position in the game. So this is what they reached. And after b6, now he went bishop d3. My main line, if I remember correctly, was bishop e2, bishop b7, and now short castle, knight d7, and a4. Please correct me if I'm wrong here. Some of you experts who have studied the 1d4 repertoire, but I think I'm quite sure that in my repertoire I also gave the move h4 immediately. As an interesting extra option, which Brunello did in a little bit of a different version. He did so one move later, I believe, with the bishop on d3. It's a little bit of a worse version, because knight d4 could come at some moment. But the funny thing was that when knight d4 came in the game, it was actually a terrible mistake. And after g4, it was already quite bad for black, and Brunello won a pretty nice attacking game after that. I just wanted to show that. Dragonev Valentin unfortunately also lost with the white pieces on the third board, so therefore it was not a great day for Austria. Hopefully we'll be able to fight back in the remaining last 2 rounds. Tomorrow is definitely gonna be a beatable opponent. Italy was a very compact and strong team, so it can happen, but of course it's quite a disappointing result, especially considering the fact that we were able to win the last 2 matches. Anyway, that was it for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed today's recap. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. You can find my courses and my social media in the video description down below. Apart from that, thank you guys, and we'll see each other tomorrow.